Good evening, dear listener, and welcome to another episode of Mortica Presents FREDtime Stories. On this show, I will be reading short horror stories from both up-and-coming authors and horror legends. In case you didn't know, I am your host, Dead Fred. I am also the voice of the horror-inspired rock band, Mortica. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to this channel, leaving a like and a comment. Hit that bell notification so you never miss another episode. If you want to know more about Mortica, please follow us all on our social media sites. The links are in the description. If you want to support the show and the band, please consider joining our Patreon page. For just $5 a month, you can have access to behind the screams footage, early access to merch and music, as well as an untold story exclusively for mortals. And now, without further ado, let's get into tonight's reading. Tonight's reading is the second part and conclusion of our story from Stephen King. This is One for the Road. We were coming up at the back of a big Mercedes. The whole hood of the thing was buried in snowdrift, and another drift had socked the whole left side of the car. But the taillights were on, and we could see exhaust drifting out of the tailpipe. They didn't run out of gas anyway, Lumley said. Tukey pulled up and pulled on the Scout's emergency brake. You remember what Booth told you, Lumley? Sure. But he wasn't thinking of anything but his wife and daughter. I don't see how anyone could blame him either. Ready, Booth? Tukey asked me. His eyes held on mine, grim and gray in the dashboard lights. I guess I am, I said. We all got out and the wind grabbed us, throwing snow in our faces. Lumley was first, bending into the wind, his fancy topcoat billowing out behind him like a sail. He cast two shadows, one from Tukey's headlights and another from his own taillights. I was behind him, and Tukey was a step behind me. When I got out to the trunk of the Mercedes, Tukey grabbed me. Let him go, he said. Janie! Francie! Lumley yelled. Everything okay? He pulled open the driver's side door and leaned in. Everything... He froze to a dead stop, the wind ripping the heavy door right out of his hand and pushing it all the way open. Holy God, Booth, Tukey said, just below the scream of the wind. I think it's happening again. Lumley turned back toward us. His face was scared and bewildered, his eyes wide. All of a sudden he lunged towards us in the snow, slipping and almost falling. He brushed by me like I was nothing and grabbed Tukey. How did you know? He roared. Where are they? What the hell is going on here? Tukey broke his grip and shoved past him. He and I looked into the Mercedes together. Warm as toast it was, but it wasn't going to be for much longer. The little amber low fuel light was glowing. The big car was empty. There was a child's Barbie doll on the passenger's floor mat, and a child's ski parka was crumpled over the seat back. Tukey put his hands over his face, and then he was gone. Lumley had grabbed him and shoved him right back into the snowbank. His face was pale and wild. His mouth was working as if he had just chewed on a bitter stuff that he couldn't yet unpucker enough to spit out. He reached in and grabbed the parka. Francie's coat, he kind of whispered, and then a loud bellowing, Francie's coat! He turned around, holding it out in front of him by the little fur-trimmed hood. He looked at me, blank and unbelieving. She can't be out there with her outer coat on, Mr. Booth. Why, she'll freeze to death. Mr. Lumley, he blundered past me, still holding the parka, shouting, Francie! Janie! Where are you? I gave Tukey my hand and pulled him to his feet. Are you all... Never mind me, he says. We gotta get a hold of him, Booth. We went after him as fast as we could, which wasn't very fast because of the hip-deep snow in some places. But then he stopped and we finally caught up to him. Mr. Lumley, Tookie said, laying his hand on his shoulder. This way, Lumley said. This is the way they went, look. We looked down, and there was kind of a dip here. Most of the wind was right over our heads, and we could see two sets of tracks. One large, one small, just filling up with snow. If we had been 5 minutes later, they would have been gone. He started to walk away, his head down. Tookie grabbed him back. No, no, Lumley. Lumley turned his wild face up to Tookie and made a fist. He drew it back, but something in Tookie's face made him falter. He looked back from Tookie and then back again. She'll freeze, he said, as if we were a couple of stupid kids. Don't you get it? She doesn't have her jacket. She's only 7. They could be anywhere, Tookie says. You can't follow those tracks. They could be gone in the next drift. What do you suggest? Lumley yells, his voice high and hysterical. If we go back and get the police, she'll freeze to death, Francie and my wife. They may be frozen already, Tookie says. His eyes caught Lumley's. Frozen or something worse. What do you mean? Lumley whispered. Get it straight, goddammit. Tell me. Mr. Lumley, Tookie says. There's something in the lot. But I was the one who finally came out with it. A word I never thought I would ever be expected to say. Vampires, Mr. Lumley. Jerusalem's lot is full of vampires. I expected that was be hard to swallow. He was staring at me as if I had gone green. Loonies, he whispered. You're a couple of loonies. Then he turned away, cupping his hands around his mouth and bellowing, Francie! Janie! He started floundering off again. The snow was up to the hem of his fancy coat. I looked at Tookie. What do we do now? Follow him, Tookie said, his hair plastered with snow, and he, did look a little bit loony. I can't just leave him out here, Booth, can you? No, I says. Guess not. So we started to wade through the snow after Lumley as best we could. But he kept getting further and further ahead. He had his youth to spend, you see. We was breaking the trail, going through the snow like a bull. My arthritis had begun to bother me something terrible, and I started to look down at my legs, telling myself, a little further, just a little further, keep going, God damn it, keep going. I plowed right into Tookie, who was standing spread-legged in a drift, his head hanging and both of his hands pressed to his chest. Tookie, I says, you okay? I'm all right, he says, taking his hands away. We'll stick with him, Booth. And when he conks out, we'll see reason. We topped a rise, and there was Lumley at the bottom, looking desperately for more tracks. Poor man. There wasn't a chance he was going to find them. The wind blew straight across down there where he was. Any tracks that would have been rubbed out in 3 minutes after they were made, let alone a couple of hours. He raised his head and screamed into the night, Francie! Janie, for God's sakes! And you can hear the desperation in his voice, the terror and pity. The only answer he got was the freight train wail of the wind. It almost seemed to be laughing at him, saying, I took them, Mr. New Jersey, with your fancy car and camel hair topcoat. I took them and rubbed out their tracks. And by morning, I'll have them just as neat and frozen as 2 strawberries in a deep freeze. Lumley, Tookie bawled over the wind. Listen, never mind vampires or boogies or nothing like that, but you mind this. You're only making it worse for them. We gotta get to the... And then there was an answer. A voice coming out of the dark like a little tinkling silver bell. And my heart turned cold as ice in a cistern. Jerry, is that you? Lumley wheeled at the sound. And then she came, drifting out of the dark, like a little ghost. She was a city woman, all right. And right then, she seemed like the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. I felt like I wanted to go to her and tell her how glad I was that she was safe. She was wearing a heavy green pullover sort of thing, poncho, I believe they called it. It floated all around her, and her dark hair streamed out of the wind, wild like water in a September creek, just before the winter freeze stills and locks it in. Maybe I did take a step towards her because I felt Tuki's hand on my shoulder, rough and warm. And still, how can I say it? I yearned after her. So dark and beautiful with that green poncho floating around her neck and shoulders. As exotic and strange as the make you think of a beautiful woman in some Walter de la Mare poem. "Janie!" Lumley cried. "Janie!" He began to struggle through the snow after her, his arms outstretched. "No!" Tuki cried. "No, Lumley!" He never even looked. But she did. She looked up at us and grinned. And when she did, I felt my longing, my yearning turned into horror, as cold as the grave, as white and silent as the bones in a shroud. Even from the rise, we can see a sullen red glare in those eyes. They were less human than a wolf's eyes. When she grinned, you can see how long her teeth had become. She wasn't human anymore. She was a dead thing, somehow came back to life in this black, howling storm. Tuki made the sign of the cross at her. She flinched, and then grinned again. We were too far away and maybe too scared. "Stop it," I whispered. "Can't we stop it?" "Too late, Booth," Tuki said grimly. Lumley had reached her. He looked like a ghost himself, coated in snow like he was. He reached for her, and then he began to scream. I'll hear that sound in my dreams. That man screaming like a child in a nightmare. He tried to break away from her, but her arms, long and bare, and as white as the snow itself, snaked out and pulled him into her. I can see her cock her head to the side and thrust her head forward. "Booth," Tuki said hoarsely, "we've got to get out of here." And so we ran like rats. I suppose someone would say, but those would have been there that night. We fled down along the old back trail, falling down, getting up again, slipping and sliding. I kept looking back over my shoulder to see if that woman was coming after us, grinning that grin and watching us with those red eyes. Then we got back to the scout, and Tuki doubled over, holding his chest. "Tuki," I said, badly scared. "What the—" "Tinker," he said. "Been bad for about 5 years now. Get me around to the shotgun seat, Booth, and then get us the hell out of here." I hooked an arm under his coat and dragged him and somehow boosted him in. He leaned his head and shut his eyes. His skin was waxy looking and yellow. I went back around to the hood of the trot and I damn near ran into the little girl. She was just standing there beside the driver's side door, her hair in pigtails, wearing nothing but a little bit of a yellow dress. "Mister?" she said in a high, clear voice as sweet as morning mist. "Won't you help me find my mother? She's gone and I'm so cold." "Honey," I said. "Honey, you better get in the truck. Your mother's—" I broke off. As if there was ever a time I was ever close to swooning, it was this moment. She was just standing there, you see, but she was standing on top of the snow. There were no tracks, not in any direction. She looked up at me then. Lumley's daughter, Francie. She was no more than 7 years old, and she was going to be 7 for an eternity of nights. Her little face was a ghastly corpse white, her eyes a red and silver you can fall into. And below her jaw, I can see 2 small punctures like pin pricks, their edges horribly mangled. She held out her arms to me and smiled. "Pick me up, mister," she said softly. "I want to give you a kiss, and then you can take me to my mommy." I didn't want to, but there was nothing I can do. I was leaning forward, my arms outstretched. I could see her mouth opening. I could see the little fangs inside the pink ring of her lips. Something slipped down her chin, bright and silvery, with a dim, distant, faraway horror. I realized she was drooling. Her small hands clasped themselves around my neck, and I was thinking, well, maybe it won't be so bad. Not so bad. Maybe it won't be so awful after a while. And maybe... And then something black flew out of the scout and struck her in the chest. There was a puff of strange-smelling smoke, a flashing glow that was gone an instant later, and then she was backing away, hissing. Her face was twisted into a vulpine mask of rage, hate, and pain. She turned sideways, and then she was gone. One moment she was there, and the next there was a twisted knot of snow that looked a little bit like a human shape. And then the wind tattered it across the fields. "Both," Tukey whispered. "Be quick now." And I was. But not so quick that I had time to pick up what he had thrown at the little girl from hell. His mother's stowaway Bible. That was some time ago. I'm a sight older now, and I was no chicken then. Herb passed on 2 years ago. He went peacefully in the night. The bar is still there. Some man and his wife from Waterville bought it. Nice people. They kept it pretty much the same. I don't go by much. It's different somehow without Tookie. Things in the lot go on pretty much as they always have. The sheriff found Lumley's car, and next day, out of gas, battery dead. Neither Tukey nor I ever said anything about it. What would have been the point? And every now and again, a hitchhiker or camper will disappear, up in Schoolyard Hill or out near Harmony Hill Cemetery. They'll turn up the fellow's knapsack or paperback book all swollen and bleached from the rain or snow or something. But never the people. I still have bad dreams about that stormy night we went out there. Not about the woman so much as the little girl. The way she smiled when she held her arms up to me, so I can pick her up, so she can give me a kiss. But I'm an old man, and time comes where dreams are done. You may have an occasion to be traveling in southern Maine yourself these days. Pretty part of the countryside. You may even stop at Tukey's bar for a drink. Nice place. They kept the name the same. Have your drink. But my advice to you is to keep right on moving north. Whatever you do, don't end up in Jerusalem's lot. Especially after dark. There's a little girl out there somewhere, and I think she's still waiting for her good night's kiss. I hope you've enjoyed tonight's reading, and hope you will stop by again. My name has been Dead Fred. Until next time, stay scared.